He slapped his wife, in front of everyone at a party. But what happened next shocked the entire family. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. Laura Bennet walked into her mother-in-law's mansion feeling a tight knot in her stomach. The chandelier-lit hall glittered with wealth, laughter, and clinking glasses, but none of it made her feel comfortable. She adjusted the sleeve of her dress nervously and forced a polite smile. Her husband, David, strode ahead with his usual confidence, talking loudly with Margaret and some of the other guests. Laura had always noticed how David enjoyed being the center of attention, how he thrived on the approval of others, especially his mother. Margaret Bennet welcomed them with a bright, rehearsed smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was the kind of woman who cared more about how things looked than how they felt. Her eyes flicked over Laura with subtle judgment, as if silently measuring her worth. Laura tried to ignore it, reminding herself that this was just another party, another night she had to survive with grace. The evening started like any other, polite small talk, laughter at David's jokes, and Laura quietly sipping her drink while the adults engaged in their usual displays of wealth and status. But David had begun dropping those familiar little remarks that had always made her skin crawl. Comments about her modest upbringing, the way she spoke, her career choices, even her friends. They were light enough for others to ignore, but heavy enough to sting her pride. Laura clenched her fists under the table, reminding herself not to react. As the night went on, the subtle jabs grew sharper. David laughed a little too loud, leaning close to Laura, whispering cutting words only she could hear. Guests glanced over but turned away, pretending not to notice the tension building in the room. Laura's heart raced, she knew it wouldn't stay quiet forever. She loved David once, deeply, and she wanted to believe he could be different, but years of subtle humiliation and manipulation had taught her to expect the worst. The air in the hall grew thicker with tension. Margaret hovered nearby, proud and oblivious, occasionally interjecting with comments that were meant to charm but only made Laura feel smaller. Laura took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm, her mind already starting to plan how to survive the night without giving David the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. Every laugh, every polite nod, every careful smile felt like walking on thin ice. She could feel the eyes of the family on her, some sympathetic, some judging. And then it happened. A single word from David, a harsh tone, and before anyone could stop him, he slapped her. The sound echoed in the room, sharp and final. Gasps filled the air, glasses clinked nervously, and the chatter died instantly. Laura's cheek burned, and the world seemed to tilt. She froze for a moment, staring at him, stunned by the betrayal. Guests looked at each other, unsure how to react. Margaret's face tightened, a flicker of shock crossing her features, but she remained silent, frozen between her pride and the need to keep appearances. Laura's mind went blank for a second, but beneath the shock, a tiny ember of something strong began to glow: anger, resolve, the recognition that she had endured enough. She could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, and she knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The party continued, but the tension between Laura and David grew thicker with every passing moment. David, with his usual arrogance, began making comments that seemed casual to everyone else but were sharp and cutting toward Laura. He laughed at her work, joking about how her job didn't require much intelligence, and made sly remarks about her family, implying they were beneath his standards. Each comment was delivered with a smile, as if he were entertaining the crowd, but Laura felt the sting behind every word. Laura tried to keep her composure. She smiled politely, nodded, and sipped her drink, hoping to make it appear like she was unbothered. Inside, however, a storm was brewing. Shame, frustration, and humiliation pressed against her chest, but she reminded herself not to give him the reaction he wanted. She had endured subtle digs for years, but being put on display in front of everyone made the pain sharper. She felt small, exposed, and powerless in that moment. The guests at the party were oblivious to the personal battle unfolding in front of him. They chatted, laughed, and clinked glasses, sensing maybe a little tension in the air but not understanding the cause. Some glanced at Laura occasionally, noting her forced smiles, but assumed it was just typical party politeness. Others were too absorbed in gossip or networking to notice. The room was a blend of wealth and charm, but underneath, Laura felt completely isolated. David's remarks grew bolder. He began sharing stories from their past, twisting little mistakes Laura had made into public jokes. At first, the comments were subtle, like a story about her fumbling at work or an awkward family dinner. Laura forced a laugh, nodding along, but her mind raced, thinking about how humiliating it was to have private moments thrown in front of strangers. She could feel the eyes of the guests shifting between him and her, some politely laughing, others raising an eyebrow, sensing something was off. Then David crossed a line. He brought up a personal mistake Laura had made years ago, something she had confided in him and expected would remain private. He turned it into a punchline for the room, exaggerating it so that everyone could see her as foolish and incapable. The laughter of the guests felt like knives cutting through her pride. Laura's hands trembled slightly, and her heart pounded in her chest. She knew this was intentional, a public humiliation meant to assert his control and make her feel powerless in front of everyone. In that moment, the air between them seemed to crack. Laura's patience was running thin, and a mix of anger and hurt burned inside her. She realized that this was no longer just teasing or jokes, it was a calculated attack on her dignity. David's cruelty had escalated, and it was only a matter of time before he would do something even more shocking. The crowd laughed, unaware of the storm that was about to erupt, and Laura silently vowed that she would not let this moment define her.
The argument started quietly at first, just sharp words exchanged between Laura and David, but it quickly escalated. David's tone grew harsher, his face red with anger. He accused her of overreacting, of being sensitive, and of embarrassing him in front of his family. Laura tried to respond calmly, explaining her side, but he wasn't listening. His voice rose, filled with frustration and control, and suddenly, without any warning, his hand struck her cheek. The room went completely silent. The slap echoed in the hall, and the glittering party around them seemed to freeze. Guests looked shocked, some shifted uncomfortably, others turned away, pretending not to see. A few whispered quietly to each other, unsure how to react to something so blatant. Margaret's eyes widened, a flicker of worry crossing her face, but she quickly masked it with a tight-lipped smile, unwilling to confront her son in front of everyone. The family's reaction, or lack of it, cut deeper than the slap itself. Laura felt the weight of betrayal not just from David but from the people who were supposed to be family, who were supposed to protect and respect her. Laura's cheek stung, but the pain she felt inside was far worse. Years of small betrayals, belittlement, and control had built up to this moment. The slap wasn't just a physical act, it was a symbol of everything David had done to undermine her, to dominate her, and to humiliate her. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of some guests who seemed frozen, uncomfortable, but unwilling to intervene. The realization that she was alone in that moment hit her harder than any physical blow. Instead of reacting with anger or tears in front of everyone, Laura took a deep breath. She straightened her posture, smoothed her dress, and walked away quietly, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She passed stunned guests without a word, leaving David standing there, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. Her departure drew murmurs and confused glances, but she didn't stop. Every step she took felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that he had tried to crush. As she reached the quiet hallway away from the party, Laura leaned against the wall, her heart still racing. Her mind was alive with thoughts, planning what she would do next. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning of her response. She knew she needed to be careful, to act with precision, and to show David and his family that she was not someone to be controlled or humiliated. The betrayal had been severe, but it had also ignited something powerful within her, a determination to take back her dignity and make sure the truth was seen by everyone who mattered. Quietly, Laura wiped her cheek and took another deep breath. She was no longer just the wife at a party, quietly enduring insults and attacks. She was someone who had been wronged, yes, but someone ready to respond. Her mind already started forming the plan, and the fire in her chest told her one thing clearly: David would regret this night, and she would make sure everyone knew the truth. After leaving the party, Laura sat alone in her quiet apartment, her mind spinning. The room felt heavy, and the silence made her thoughts louder. She thought about her marriage, about all the small moments that, at the time, seemed minor but now formed a clear pattern of control and manipulation. David hadn't just slapped her tonight, this had been building for years. Every comment that belittled her intelligence, every decision he made without consulting her, every subtle dig at her family, it was all part of a larger pattern. She remembered the times he had hidden money from her, pretending finances were tight while he spent lavishly without explanation. She thought about the nights she had sensed something wrong, the way he would disappear for hours, answer vague questions with vague excuses, and return with a charming smile that masked the secrets he was keeping. There were the quiet moments of emotional manipulation, too, when he made her feel guilty for spending time with friends, when he twisted her words so she doubted her own memory, when he questioned her feelings as if she were overreacting. All of it had slowly chipped away at her confidence, leaving her second-guessing herself, walking on eggshells to avoid his anger. Laura's mind replayed the night she cried silently in bed, feeling trapped but hoping for change. She remembered how she had excused his behavior, convincing herself that love required patience, that marriage was about compromise, that she just needed to endure. But tonight's slap had shattered the illusion. It was no longer a private conflict, no longer something she could ignore or forgive quietly. It was public, undeniable, and humiliating. She could no longer pretend that his words and actions were harmless or that his charm after the fact erased the pain. As she sat there, Laura felt a mix of sadness, anger, and determination. She realized that silence had allowed him to control her for too long. Her fear of confrontation, her attempts to keep peace, had only strengthened his power over her. But tonight had awakened something in her, a clarity that she could no longer ignore. She refused to let years of abuse define her or dictate her future. She thought about what she wanted moving forward. She wanted justice, but more than that, she wanted freedom, freedom from his manipulation, freedom from fear, and freedom to live her life on her own terms. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that facing him and exposing his actions would be uncomfortable, perhaps even dangerous socially, but she also knew that she could not remain silent any longer. By the time she stood up and walked to the window, Laura's decision was firm. She would take control of her life and her story. The betrayal had hurt deeply, but it had also given her a gift, the clarity to see him for who he truly was and the courage to act. She promised herself that she would no longer be quiet, that she would no longer allow humiliation or lies to go unchallenged. This was the turning point, and she was ready to face it head-on.
Laura knew she couldn't face David or his family blindly. She needed a plan, one that would protect her dignity while showing everyone the truth. She reached out to a few trusted friends who had seen David's behavior over the years. They were shocked by what had happened at the party and immediately offered their support. Laura explained what she wanted to do, and they helped her think through every detail carefully. Their encouragement gave her confidence, she realized she wasn't alone, and that thought strengthened her resolve. Next, she contacted a lawyer to understand her legal options. She didn't want to make mistakes that could backfire or allow David to manipulate the situation further. The lawyer explained the steps she could take to protect herself, including documenting everything, gathering evidence, and understanding her rights in case things escalated. Laura listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. Every piece of advice made her feel more prepared. She wasn't just reacting anymore, she was planning. Laura's strategy was simple but powerful. She wanted to expose David's true nature in a way that left no doubt but did not make her seem petty or vengeful. She knew it had to be public enough for everyone at the next family gathering to see, but controlled enough that she wouldn't lose her composure. It would be calculated, precise, and undeniable. Over the next few days, Laura began quietly preparing. She gathered evidence of David's lies and manipulation, financial documents, texts, and small notes she had kept over the years. She also spoke with friends who had witnessed his behavior and asked if they would be willing to support her if needed. Every step she took was deliberate. She practiced staying calm, speaking clearly, and keeping her emotions in check. She reminded herself that this wasn't about revenge, it was about truth and reclaiming her power. When the next Bennett family event was announced, Laura felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation. She attended the party as if nothing had happened, smiling politely and engaging in small talk, while inside, her mind was sharp and focused. Every word David said, every gesture, she observed carefully, ready to act at the right moment. She noticed the subtle power plays, the way he tried to dominate conversations and control the room. But she was no longer the quiet observer, she was the one with a plan. Even in the midst of laughter and polite chatter, Laura felt the tension rising. She moved through the crowd with grace, greeting guests and keeping up appearances, all the while imagining how the reveal would unfold. The stakes were high, and the pressure was real, but she felt an unexpected calm beneath it. For the first time in years, she felt in control. She had a strategy, allies, and evidence. David's arrogance and the family's blind loyalty would not stop her. Tonight, she would show them the truth, and she would do it with her head held high. Laura spent the next few weeks quietly gathering evidence, determined to have a clear and undeniable picture of David's behavior. She went through their financial records carefully and discovered accounts and transactions he had kept hidden. Money he had spent without her knowledge, investments she had no idea existed, and secret payments that didn't add up. Each discovery made her realize how much he had lied and manipulated her over the years. She also started collecting proof of the emotional abuse she had endured. She found old messages, notes, and reminders of conversations where David had belittled her, twisted her words, or made her feel guilty for expressing her feelings. Even small incidents she had brushed off at the time now added up to a clear pattern of control and manipulation. It was painful to read through these memories, but Laura knew they would be crucial to exposing the truth. Laura reached out to friends and acquaintances who had witnessed some of David's worst behavior. Some were hesitant at first, afraid of getting involved, but most were willing to support her. They recounted moments she had forgotten or hadn't thought were significant, adding more pieces to the puzzle. With each conversation, Laura felt a growing sense of validation. She realized she wasn't imagining things, the abuse and betrayal were real, and now she had the proof to show it. As she organized the evidence, Laura began to feel a shift inside herself. The anger and hurt were still there, but now they were accompanied by a sense of empowerment. She was no longer a passive victim waiting for things to happen, she was taking control, planning carefully, and preparing to reclaim her dignity. Every document she filed, every witness she confirmed, every memory she revisited was a small victory, reminding her that she had the strength to stand up for herself. Even as she prepared, Laura couldn't help but feel the tension building for what was coming next. The next family gathering loomed in her mind, the stage where everything would come together. She imagined the moment she would calmly and clearly expose David's lies and betrayals in front of everyone, the reactions of his mother, the shocked silence of guests, and the satisfaction of finally speaking her truth. The anticipation made her nervous, but it also sharpened her focus. Laura went over her plan repeatedly, making sure she had everything in order. She wanted the reveal to be perfect, not cruel, not vengeful, just the truth presented with confidence. She pictured herself walking into the room, composed and strong, letting the evidence speak for itself. The thought of finally confronting David with proof of his manipulation gave her courage, and she could feel the fire inside her growing stronger. As the day of the next family event approached, Laura felt ready. She had prepared, gathered her evidence, and aligned her witnesses. For the first time in years, she felt in control of the situation, confident that she would no longer be silenced or humiliated. The turning point was near, and she was determined to make it count. The invitation arrived a week before the next Bennett family gathering. Laura stared at it for a long moment, her fingers tracing the embossed letters. She felt a mix of anxiety and determination. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the chance to confront David and finally reveal the truth to everyone who mattered. She took a deep breath and reminded herself to stay calm and collected. Appearances would matter, and she had to show strength, not anger. On the day of the event, Laura chose her outfit carefully. She wanted to appear composed and confident, someone who had nothing to hide. When she arrived at Margaret's estate, the grandeur of the mansion felt suffocating, but she held her head high. David was already there, moving through the crowd with his usual arrogance, shaking hands, laughing loudly, and clearly trying to impress the guests. He seemed unaware that Laura had changed, that she was no longer the timid, compliant wife he thought he could control. Guests mingled, chatting and laughing, completely unaware of the storm about to unfold. Some glanced at Laura and noticed a quiet confidence in her demeanor, but they didn't realize the preparation and strategy behind it. Small interactions, polite smiles, and casual greetings set the tone of normalcy, masking the tension that simmered beneath the surface. Every glance, every polite nod, every passing comment was like a quiet countdown to what was coming. Laura moved through the room with precision, greeting a few family members and friends she trusted. She mentally reviewed her plan, making sure each detail was in place. Her evidence was ready, her witnesses were aware of their roles, and her composure was steady. She would reveal David's betrayals in a way that left no doubt, but she would do it calmly, without screaming or breaking down. Her approach would be precise, sharp, and unforgettable. David, meanwhile, seemed to sense something different. His smile faltered occasionally, and he tried to draw attention to himself even more, perhaps unconsciously preparing to assert control. But Laura ignored his antics. She focused on the room, noting where guests were positioned, who would notice her statements most clearly, and when the right moment would arrive. Each interaction, though polite on the surface, was part of her setup, a way to make sure the truth landed in the right place at the right time. As the evening progressed, the tension in the air grew, though no one realized it. The elegant hall, the polite laughter, the sparkling glasses, all created the perfect stage for confrontation. Laura walked with quiet determination, each step reinforcing her confidence. She was no longer someone who endured humiliation silently. Tonight, she would show everyone exactly who David really was, and she would do it with her head held high. Every detail mattered, and Laura was ready. The guests continued to chatter, unaware that the calm, poised woman among them was holding the key to exposing the truth. The pieces were in place, the audience was present, and the moment that could change everything was approaching. Laura felt a steady excitement beneath her nerves, knowing that soon, the story she had lived for years would finally be told, and no one could ignore it. As the party reached its peak, the room was filled with laughter, music, and conversation. Laura waited for the perfect moment, standing quietly near the center of the hall. She took a deep breath and subtly drew everyone's attention, her calm presence cutting through the chatter. Guests turned toward her, curious about the sudden seriousness in her voice. "I need to say something," she began, her tone steady and clear. "Something everyone here deserves to know." The room fell silent, the sparkle of polite laughter fading as people sensed the weight in her words. Laura's eyes met David's, and for the first time in years, she didn't flinch. She had prepared this moment carefully, and now it was time. She started with the slap, the moment that had shocked her so deeply at the previous party. She described it calmly, recounting how he had struck her in front of everyone, how it had left her not only physically hurt but deeply humiliated. Gasps filled the room, and David's face shifted from surprise to anger. Margaret's eyes widened in disbelief, and a few guests whispered to each other, unsure how to respond. Next, Laura addressed the financial betrayals. She outlined the hidden accounts, the secret spending, and the lies he had told to manipulate and control her over the years. She held up evidence, simple and clear, showing the proof she had gathered. The room went quieter, and some guests leaned forward to look at the documents, realizing the depth of the deception. David shifted uncomfortably, his usual confidence faltering under the weight of undeniable facts. Finally, Laura spoke about the emotional manipulation. She shared examples of how he had twisted her words, made her feel guilty for simple choices, and consistently undermined her confidence. She didn't exaggerate or raise her voice, she stated the truth with precision, letting the weight of the actions speak for themselves. She called on a few trusted witnesses, who confirmed what she said, reinforcing her story and leaving little room for doubt. The reactions were immediate. Shock, disbelief, and murmurs spread through the room. Guests who had laughed at small comments before now realized the true nature of the man they had admired. Some shifted uncomfortably, seeing the contrast between David's public charm and the private cruelty Laura had revealed. David tried to speak, to deny, to explain, but every lie crumbled under the evidence and the voices of witnesses. Margaret's expression changed from pride to horror as she finally understood what had been happening all these years. David, who had always appeared in control, looked small and exposed. His arrogance melted away, replaced by a mix of anger, shame, and helplessness. Laura remained composed, her posture calm, her voice steady. She had turned the tables completely, and the room had seen it all. By the time she finished, the room was silent. David was left trying to recover, but the truth was undeniable. Laura had spoken with courage and clarity, and everyone present knew exactly who he was. She had reclaimed her power, and the humiliation that had been hers for years now belonged to him. The confrontation was over, but its impact would be felt long after the party ended. After Laura finished speaking, the room remained still for a long moment. Her calm, steady voice had carried every word, every truth, and it left no room for argument. David's face had turned pale, his usual arrogance replaced by visible shame. The charm and confidence he had relied on for years crumbled instantly under the weight of her words and the evidence she had presented. Guests who had admired him now looked at him differently, some with pity, others with quiet judgment. Laura's words had done more than expose his actions, they had humiliated him publicly. Every insult, every manipulation, every betrayal he had committed was now out in the open, seen by those he had wanted to impress and control. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but the carefully collected evidence and the testimony of witnesses left him no escape. He had tried to dominate and belittle her for years, and now he was the one standing small, powerless, and exposed. Margaret watched silently at first, her pride faltering. The realization hit her slowly but hard, her favoritism toward David, her blind support, and her obsession with appearances had allowed this behavior to continue. She had ignored warning signs, dismissed Laura's feelings, and encouraged the very arrogance and cruelty that was now on display. For the first time, she had to face her complicity, her own mistakes glaringly visible to everyone in the room. Laura remained composed, her posture confident, her expression calm yet fierce. She didn't gloat or shout, she let the truth speak for itself. With each passing moment, she felt her power and self-respect return. Years of humiliation, manipulation, and control were lifted from her shoulders. She had reclaimed her dignity, standing tall in front of everyone who had once doubted or ignored her. David tried to speak again, attempting excuses or half-hearted denials, but the room was no longer on his side. Guests asked questions, some quietly, some pointedly, forcing him to confront the reality of his actions. He stumbled over his words, unable to regain control of the situation. His isolation was immediate and complete. Friends who had admired him now saw the truth. Colleagues, family members, and acquaintances all quietly registered the change. The man who had appeared powerful and untouchable was now vulnerable, embarrassed, and alone. Laura finally turned away, walking through the crowd with grace. Each step was measured, calm, and deliberate. She acknowledged a few supportive nods from friends who had quietly stood by her side, but she didn't linger on anyone else. The humiliation that had been hers for so long now belonged to him, and she had no need to gloat. She had achieved justice without losing herself in anger or revenge. As she left the gathering, Laura felt an immense sense of relief and triumph. David remained behind, confronted by family and friends, trying to piece together his response, while she walked away with dignity. She had faced the betrayal, exposed the lies, and reclaimed her life. The balance had shifted, and she knew that nothing would ever put her in that powerless position again. As Laura walked away from the party, a sense of calm washed over her. The tension, the fear, and the humiliation that had weighed on her for years were finally lifting. She reflected on everything she had endured, the subtle insults, the emotional manipulation, the betrayals that had slowly chipped away at her confidence. It had been painful, exhausting, and at times, lonely, but she now realized that each of those experiences had led her to this moment of empowerment. She was no longer defined by the cruelty of someone else, she had reclaimed her strength, her dignity, and her voice. Laura thought about how easy it would have been to remain silent, to endure the abuse in private and avoid conflict. She understood now that silence protects abusers, letting them continue their control without challenge. Speaking up had been difficult, frightening even, but it had also been liberating. Every word she had spoken, every piece of evidence she had presented, had been a step toward freedom, not just for her, but for her sense of self. She had faced the truth, spoken it aloud, and in doing so, she had saved herself from further harm. As she moved through the crowd one last time, she noticed the subtle nods and supportive smiles from friends who had been quietly standing by her side. Their presence reminded her that she had allies, people who believed in her and her courage. For the first time in years, she felt genuinely proud of herself, not just for confronting David, but for finding the inner strength to act with clarity, calmness, and dignity. She realized that courage wasn't about anger or revenge, it was about standing firm in the truth, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable it might be. The mansion, once a place that had felt suffocating and full of judgment, now seemed different. Laura's steps were steady, her posture strong. She knew that she had turned a painful experience into a lesson in resilience and self-respect. Betrayal had been part of her journey, yes, but it had not broken her. Instead, it had shown her the depth of her own strength and the power of truth. She had faced humiliation, manipulation, and lies, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and unafraid to stand for herself. As she stepped out into the night, the cool air against her face felt refreshing, like a new beginning. Her friends walked beside her, their quiet support filling her with a sense of belonging and reassurance. Laura smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that she hadn't allowed herself to show in years. She felt free, empowered, and certain that she would never let anyone diminish her again. She paused for a moment, looking back at the mansion one last time, and whispered to herself, almost as a reminder to anyone who might face a similar struggle, sometimes the hardest act of courage is standing up, not just for yourself, but for the truth. With that, she walked forward, leaving the past behind and embracing the strength she had fought so hard to reclaim.